Hey, we're here with Cole Imperi, the American thanatologist,
Hey guys, I'm so happy to be here.
and she's here to answer all your questions about the study of death and dying, death doulas, and a lot more.
To learn more about Cole, watch the full introduction in video 1 of this series. If you're on YouTube, we've linked to that video in the description below. A big part about thanatology is the study of the social and emotional aspects of death and dying. So we have Brad Humble from Facebook, and he wants to know, what has been the most revealing thing you have learned while studying this subject? I've recently had a death in the family, and seeing its psychological effects on the family is quite interesting due to their ideas around emotion and withholding how they truly feel.
When there's a dead person, dead body, that's easy sort of to understand and deal with, right? We have a dead person, we have the steps that we follow, and then we do those things. But what is happening sort of invisibly is that all of the people that were attached to the dead person that are still living, there's a reshuffling occurring. Because if a head of household dies, well, who's the new sort of head of household? And that means that there's going to be a reconfiguring of the sort of social networks of your family group, your friend group, your immediate family, your extended family, even your coworkers. A lot of times when in our employment situations, when someone experiences a major loss and then people know about it, sometimes people treat you differently because of their own issues with death and dying, or because they think that you're changed. So it's the aftermath of a death is very complex, very difficult, and there's something called emotional maturity. We see there's a connection between individuals who have higher levels of emotional maturity, are better able to comprehend, process, and deal with all the emotions surrounding a loss. People who tend to have lower levels of emotional maturity tend to do things like withhold, ice you out, say, get over it, it's not a big deal. They're not good at recognizing that someone else may feel something that you may not feel, but their feelings are okay. And, you need to respect them and not be like, your sadness doesn't exist. So, yeah, which happens a lot. One of the biggest, grief, we say that we feel grief, right, after somebody dies. I would argue that grief isn't a feeling. Grief is an umbrella term that we assign to all the feelings that show up after a death. We say, okay, I'm carrying the grief umbrella, and today that umbrella is mostly anger, and that umbrella is mostly sadness. But tomorrow, I may feel like denial or bargaining or be like, oh, it's fine. I'm actually not impacted that much by this loss. So I would argue that one of the problems that we face in the US and Canada is grief. We like say, oh, I'm grieving, but really you're feeling anger today or you're feeling something different another day. And we're not good at knowing the feelings that we have during the grief response. And that's where a lot of the issues erupt from.
Was there a point in your studies where you had a sort of aha moment that you were like, oh, wow, this makes so much sense, in terms of, even on the psychological or emotional aspects of death?
Part of the reason that I'm good at death, and I'm good at death, good at dying, good at looking at this stuff, is because my family's not. And that's something that I say to a lot of people who are interested in death and dying, because a lot of times you don't fit in your family in that way. You're like the only one that is comfortable with this. And a lot of times that's because there wasn't this in your family dynamic. And so sometimes as kids, we learn the roles that are unfulfilled. And so sometimes you're good at something because everybody else wasn't, and that's okay. So when I started to see that and see how my family dealt with death my mom's side is Catholic, and so they tend to have that Catholic, like, we're super, like, formal about it kind of thing. But that's not really, and I'm like, let's feel it. How do you feel? And I didn't fit in with that. So that was a moment when I realized that helped me understand why am I comfortable with this? Why is this so interesting to me?
Yeah, it's funny. I used to think that my family wasn't okay with it either. And then once I started studying death and they kind of figured out what it was that I was actually doing, I realized that they were really interested in it. They just never had a venue to speak about it, and I just visited
Didn't know how.
Exactly, and I just visited my mom, and she was bugging me about going to take a walk in a cemetery, and like
It's not a bad thing.
no, but even
No,
small things like
yeah.
that, it's such a refreshing change from the way that I used to think about how they thought about death.
Yes.
We're often the death couple at every party, and people just end up coming to talk to us about death and dying, which we love, but it happens almost every time. And
they
every
share
time,
their grief too, right? It's
Yeah.
a lot of our friends coming up to us saying, "Oh yeah, when my grandmother died, we had a really hard time, and I couldn't talk about it." And we become this. I guess because we know the subject, we become,
or because we're open about talking about it, so people clearly want to talk about it, right? And that's something that I think we've all been discovering as more and more people have been opening up, that there is a need and there is a want and a desire to speak about death and dying. And it's, as we all know, a taboo, more of a hush-hush type of subject, because it can be very painful. When you have the opportunity to speak about it, people really appreciate it.
Yep. And I would say to anyone that has a passion for death and dying, I would argue, or I would present this to you, that you have a little bit of a responsibility to be willing to model for others how to talk about death and dying, because who else is going to teach the world how to be better at dealing with emotional stuff?